Right. Okay, I'm ready. Shall I begin? Have we got, how many people? Oh, we've got lots of people in. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our presentation and event tonight. Just before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. Please, can you turn off your cameras if you haven't already? I see most people have, and mute your mics just so that we can keep things moving smoothly. I'll just give you a brief introduction to who we are. So we are the University of Bath's VIP, which is a vertically integrated project and co-creation team. So we're a kind of, so the VIPs are sort of research-based or knowledge transfer project that helps interdisciplinary and multi-level teams to work together on a project. And our team is made up of academics, artists, postgrads, undergrads, and other stakeholders in the community. Our project aims to increase the visibility of Bath's uncomfortable past using art-based methods and co-creation. So it's a little bit of a brief introduction as to who we are. I'm just going to try to share my screen, which has now disappeared. Bear with me 2 seconds. Sorry, guys. Okay, right. So I just give you a little bit of an outline of what we're going to do this evening. First of all, there's going to be a presentation that will briefly explain the background of our project, what we've created as a result of that. And following that, there'll be a discussion panel where you'll have the opportunity at the end of that to ask lots of questions, either from the panel or from the people that have presented. So we hope that you will contribute to the discussion. And finally, we'll have a creative sharing activity that I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will ask those questions to the panelists and the presenters after they have finished their parts. Okay. So the creative activity. So as part of our project, we've discussed the role of monuments and memorials to remember the past in our shared spaces. And we've thought a lot about who and what should be memorialized and where it should be. And part of this project, we're looking at ways to make Bath's uncomfortable past more visible. And we'd like to invite you to participate in a creative activity to help us design a memorial. If you're not from Bath or you're not familiar with Bath, you don't have to design a memorial for Bath. We're happy for you to do something that's for your own city. Okay. You should have received a pack of images that you can use to collage with or do something digital with. But feel free to paint or draw or sculpt or write a poem or use whatever creative output you're comfortable with. We're not expecting anything amazing, although we'd like it, but we're not expecting it. And but what we're really interested in is some kind of creative representation of your ideas. And we'd like you to work on this during the evening's activities, because maybe some of the discussion and things will help inform your ideas. We'd like you to share your work with us. So as a final part of tonight's event, we're going to ask you to share anything that you've created on our Padlet board. There's a link. You should have had a link in your email, but I'll also share with you a QR code. There it is, that you can scan with your phone, and you will need the password, which is BUP, and I do think it's case sensitive. So, but we'll share that again with you at the end if you need it again. If you share your creation on our Padlet, we are taking that as that you're happy for us to then share your work on our social media outlets or use it for our project. So hopefully you'll be happy to share that, and yeah, we look forward to seeing everything that you do, and we hope that you have an interesting and fun time doing your creative activity while you listen to the presentation and the participants. Okay. So I shall now play the first part of our presentation from, well, she'll introduce herself. Okay, here we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole. I'm a master's student at the University of Bath studying international development, and I'm the group facilitator of this project. So I'm just going to give some background of our project before Thibaut goes into explaining the details of the walk we created. So just a few disclaimers. This is just a brief overview of decolonization. Decolonization is a very broad topic, and I won't go into details, but we have experts here that can give you a deeper understanding of these terms in history. The second disclaimer is that this talk will draw on ideas from scholars and other researchers, and we will share these slides with you at the end with a full list of references. So our project broadly seeks to decolonize British history. Specifically, we are looking at the legacies of colonial slavery in Bath. For people who have never heard of decolonization before, traditionally it referred to the undoing of colonial rule. So this meant the physical action or the process of a state withdrawing from a formal colony, where formal colonies would achieve independence. But more recently, it has been understood that decolonization doesn't only involve the physical action of leaving a formal colony, but addressing the cultural and ideological legacies that are left behind by colonialism. So essentially, decolonization is about freeing our minds, institutions, and practices from colonial ideology. It involves challenging existing power relations within society, reflecting more critically about whose stories have been dominant and whose have been marginalized. And in this context, it is analyzing the content of history and how it has been taught. So for example, when we hear about Britain's colonial history, we often hear about how the British achieved abolition through stories of white heroes like William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson, but we don't hear about how Britain benefited from transatlantic slavery for hundreds of years. We don't hear about the lives of enslaved people in the Caribbean and their contributions to Britain, and we don't hear about influential Black abolitionists in both the West Indies and Britain during this time. So we are only given one dominant perspective, and this is the white Eurocentric narrative, and this is what we want to challenge here. So decolonization is based on a concern about how forces of colonialism have shaped both our past and our present. Next slide, please. So the common question that comes up when we talk about decolonizing British history is, why should we talk about this now? And I think the importance of telling this story is that for hundreds of years, Britain was largely built on colonial slavery. It helped Britain develop its economy, institutions, infrastructure, society, and so on. And so the problem is we tend to think of this history as something that happened out there, as most of it didn't happen in Britain, it happened on British colonies. So it's easy to detach ourselves from this history, but the reality is no one is separate from the story. All of us who live in this country have been affected and touched by this history in different ways. And as we've already discussed, colonialism has real world consequences even today. And so for this reason, it is all of our jobs to engage with this history, to be truth-telling and to decolonize our understanding of British colonialism. Studying history also enables us to develop a better understanding of the world in which we live in today. And we cannot choose the parts of history that serve us, that make some of us feel good about ourselves and forget those that don't, as this creates a fictitious reality, and this is not the function of history. History is about learning from the past so that we can build a better present and future. So the way that history is told in Britain is politicized. It is used to preserve a deep sense of patriotism. And as David Olusoga said before, it is used more for recreational purposes rather than for education. We also need to tell more BAME stories, and that is Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic stories, as British history does not only belong to white people. With this in mind, I've added a quote by Nabasha Ray, which says, "For our society to cohere, to find a successful identity in the 21st century, with a vision to carry us all forward, we need to shake off some of the shibboleths of the past. Otherwise, our vision will be unbalanced by a false sense of what Britain has been, by omission of the contributions of far too many of our citizens." Next slide, please. So for the purpose of orientating this conversation in the modern day context, we can look to the events of last summer, where Black Lives Matter movement protesters in Bristol protested against institutionalized and systemic racism, and they argued that the UK needs to confront its colonial legacy. This resulted in the removal of the Edward Colston statue by protesters. So for those of you who don't know, Edward Colston invested a lot of money into Bristol during the 17th century, which is why he was honored with a monument and buildings and even streets named after him. But these contributions were funded by his involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, and this was ignored. So this was a contentious event. Some even argued that this was an erasure of history. But there's an irony here, because statues cannot tell a story. That is not their function. Their function is to honor someone and to become part of a city's culture. So really, Black Lives Matter protesters really just brought this discussion to the public sphere. Alongside protests, petitions were initiated around the country, arguing to teach Britain's colonial history in schools, which got tens of thousands of signatures, which really signifies that there is a growing understanding of the need to engage with this history. It's also important to note that this isn't a new debate. Many BAME writers, artists, and academics have been calling for this for decades. It's just that last summer's events just brought these discussions to the public eye. So our question is now, what is the best way to decolonize this history? Next slide, please. So for some brief overview of Britain's links to colonial slavery, the first English slave trader can be traced back to 1562 by a man named John Hawkins, but British slave trade became dominant around 1640s. The three most dominant ports where slave trade was carried out was London, Bristol, and Liverpool, but slave ownership existed across the country, as we can see with Bath. It is estimated that Britain transported 3.1 million Africans to the British colonies in the Caribbean, North and South America, and to other countries. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 formally freed approximately 800,000 Africans, who were then the legal property of British slave owners. When this act was passed, there were 46,000 slave owners in Britain. A common misconception is that it was just the rich, upper class who owned slaves, but actually slave ownership was much more common than this in Britain. It existed among middle and even below middle class citizens. So another largely unknown fact about British abolition is that it was achieved through a compensation program, where the British government distributed £20 million to compensate for the loss of British slave owners. And this translates to about 16 to 17 billion pounds in modern times. And this was 40% of Britain's economic budget during this time. Former enslaved individuals received no compensation and were forced to work for a further 5 years following abolition. Another very important fact to highlight here when we talk about abolition is that it wasn't just British people who achieved abolition. There were resistant movements among the enslaved in places like Jamaica and Haiti, which helped achieve abolition. Next slide, please. So this brings us onto Bath's links to colonial slavery. I put this picture up to show the contrast between the lives of those enslaved on plantations who were helping to fund the development and wealth of Bath during this time, and this very picturesque, airbrushed portrayal of Bath. Through our project, we try to show that there are many links of Bath's colonial past, including the architecture around the city and the many lives of people who were slave owners, enslaved, abolitionists, or simply just benefited from the products and the wealth generated from the slave trade. We tried to capture this diversity of stories in our project, and I will now let Thibaut explain more about our project in the next slides. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Thibaut, and I am one of the students, part of the team that was working on the map and helping to design the map specifically. And I'm just going to be talking to you about kind of how we actually acted on our original intentions to produce an outcome that explore decolonizing Bath. So we chose the map as a tool to engage the general public with decolonizing their understanding of Bath's key landmarks and historical figures. We saw walking as a reflective and expressive activity, which is accessible and also still possible with the COVID restrictions currently ongoing. We applied principles of co-creation to produce a collage of stories and sketches of key places on a single map. We began this task by researching buildings and key places in Bath, as well as well-known and lesser-known key figures in the history of Bath's colonial past. Achieving a diversity of stories was crucial to portray a more complete narrative. Retracing these narratives often led us to unexpected places with unexpected connections. We discovered interlinked stories across gender, space, and race. Research from the writing team originated from varied sources and was also informed by real-world experiences through exploring Bath locations such as Bath Abbey, where we found a memorial to James Holder Elaine, and cemeteries, where we found the memorial to Mumu. The look of the map was key. Creating something that could be read and understood whilst walking was the main task of the design team. The challenge of achieving clarity of information in a dense format, which combined the graphic design efforts of Galina and Daria, was the key task. We took inspiration from the style of historical and tourist maps of Bath to create a graphic that was eye-catching and detailed, clearly connecting built places to historical figures. The limitations of space meant we aimed to incorporate suitable characters, but several could not be included. But this showed the depth of Bath's links to the slave trade. So now I'll just go over kind of the shorter routes of the two routes offered. I'm just going to play it at quarter speed so that it. So we begin the walk in Bath Abbey, which was built between the 12th and 16th centuries. It contains the most memorials to deceased former slave owners in the country. The walls and floors are filled with plaques to the memory of individuals whose influence can be traced across Britain's former colonies. These include a plaque to James Holder Elaine. Who received compensation for 739 enslaved people in Barbados, and this is located in the North Transept. There's also a window filled for the memory of James Hayward Markland, who was a prominent pro-slavery campaigner. Leaving the Abbey, we reach the Friends Meeting House along Lower Bow Walls, where anti-slavery campaigners and former enslaved people, Ellen and William Craft, delivered a speech in 1856. The Crafts were enslaved in Macon, Georgia, and succeeded in a daring escape and settled in England in 1850. In 1860, they published their story, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, which was a compelling publication that influenced audiences in the UK and the US. Pulteney Bridge, completed in 1774, connected the city with the land of the Pulteney family. William Pulteney's wealth was derived to a great extent from Caribbean plantations and the work of enslaved people. Abolitionists such as Hannah More and William Wilberforce, as well as slave owners like Alexander Scott, resided along Pulteney Street. Alexander Scott lived at 18 Great Pulteney Street. He owned a plantation in Barbados, the Baileys, on which Britain's rebellion took place in 1816. This was a significant uprising against slave owners by enslaved people on the island, which took place in the context of the late slave rebellions across the Caribbean. Today, Bussard is remembered as a national hero of Barbados. The Holborn Museum, completed in 1799, displays artworks collected by William Thomas Holborn, using wealth that was derived from slavery through endowments from his aunt. Portraits of socialites by Thomas Gainsborough are displayed here, such as that of the Byams family, which was a family who owned one of the largest plantations in Antigua with 132 enslaved workers. As we cross the Avon, we reach the Institution for the Blind and Deaf along Walcott Parade, which opened in 1843. Mumu, baptized as Annie Jane Elwyn in 1857, lived here from 1856 until her death in 1866. Mumu was rescued as a child from a vessel carrying enslaved people in Sierra Leone. Hearing impaired from birth, she was invited to Bath at the age of 15 to receive education at the institution, where she was noted for her affectionate nature, intelligence, and rapid progress. After her death at the age of 25, she was buried at Locksbrook Cemetery, and her gravestone can still be found there. As we walk back towards the city centre of Bath, we reach the Museum of Bath Architecture, which was previously the Methodist chapel built for Selina Hastings in 1765. Hastings, the Countess of Huntingdon, spent her wealth on philanthropic projects, including promoting the writings of formerly enslaved African anti-slavery campaigners with religious views compatible to her own, such as Olaudah Equiano. She became a slave owner in 1770 after the death of her chaplain, who owned plantations in America, and she even brought more enslaved laborers to fund her orphanages. The assembly rooms, which were built by John Wood the Younger in 1769 to 1771, was a location where Olaudah Equiano delivered a speech in 1793. Equiano was a former enslaved Beninese person who purchased his freedom in 1766, after which he became a leading member of the abolitionist group, the Sons of Africa. He published his autobiography in 1789, which depicted the horrors of the trade. The influence of his writings helped gain passage of the British Slave Trade Act in 1807. George Augustus Polgreen Bridgetower, 1778 to 1860, was an African-European violin virtuoso born in Poland. His father took him on tours to European cities, including Bath, and 500 guests attended his first concert at the Assembly Rooms. He collaborated with Beethoven in 1803 and became a member of the Royal Philharmonic Society. As we approach the end of the Royal Crescent, we also approach the residence of Nathaniel Wells, 1779 to 1852, who lived at 9 Park Street. He was born in St. Kitts, the owner of slave owner William Wells and an enslaved house servant. He was baptized in 1783 and declared free, and inherited his father's sugar plantations after his death in 1794. He was awarded compensation for 86 enslaved people on three plantations after abolition. As we approach the end of our walk, we reach Queen Square, which was the first major speculative development of John Wood's master plan. The Woodses contributed to raising the city's status through grand building projects funded by landowners, churchmen, and entrepreneurs, whose wealth was to a great extent derived from slavery. And that's the end of the walk.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole.
Sorry, guys. Christina, do you want me to skip to?
Thank you, Nicole and Thibault, for this presentation. And now I would like to introduce our discussion panel. We proposed 4 broad groups of questions today for discussion. The first of these concerns the silence in our city. So what makes it challenging to break the silence about the uncomfortable past? What strategies can be used? How can art be used to help us? And what good practices could be shared from other cities? The second question addresses the purpose of memorials in our society. Who should be involved in making memorials, and who can unmake them? What is their aim, and who is their audience? Do we do memorials for the people alive or the people who died? And what feelings and what thoughts should be reflected by these memorials? And thirdly, how could the legacies of slavery and slave ownership be made visible in the public space in places like Bath? How can art help us move forward towards reflection and regeneration rather than negative feelings and shame? And finally, can museums, cultural institutions, and memorial practices be decolonized while these are often institutions that were born out of the colonial undertaking? So can they be decolonized at all, and how can they be made more inclusive and attractive, especially for minority audiences? Our panelists today are Dr. Sean Naftali Sobers, a photographer, filmmaker, and academic at the University of West of England in Bristol, director of the Critical Race and Culture Research Network, and trustee of Fairfield House. His work explores personal narratives, hidden histories, and Rastafari culture, among other topics, and he often works with young people and communities. Professor Alan Rice is director of the Research Center in Migration, Diaspora and Exile at the University of Lancashire. He's co-director of the Institute for Black Atlantic Research, an activist involved in building a memorial in Lancaster to remember the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. And most importantly, he has also been involved recently in designing a similar walking map of the city of Lancaster, so similar to our map of Bath. Our third speaker is Jill Sutherland, an emerging Bristol-based academic and curatorial fellow whose work at the Holborn Museum in Bath is focused on interpretation and the new permanent display of a plantation book from Barbados from 2020. Dr. Richard White, a Bath-based artist researcher who uses walking as a tool to engage different audiences with reluctant heritage in Bath and elsewhere. And finally, Ralph Menglet, an artist who was born in Haiti and who is today based in Montreal, where he runs the Center of Arts at Maison Haiti, and he uses art as a pedagogical tool to engage with young audiences in creative workshops. Unfortunately, Sean will not be able to attend this event today, but he came a week ago to one of our meetings where he gave us some feedback on our walking tour, and we also asked him a few questions which we recorded. So I will play a short recording from Sean, and after I will ask Alan, Jill, Richard, and Ralph to talk for a few minutes about any of these questions that seem relevant to their experience, after which we will open the discussion and you can ask questions to the panelists. The panelists can ask each other's question, and everybody can also ask questions to our group.
Okay, I'm just going to play Sean's short recording for us.
Why do you think this history has been so neglected in Britain?
Why has it been so neglected? I think one is just because it's not seen to be important, significant. Another one that it hasn't been invested in with attention and time. You know, what I used to get called, what I used to do, like untold stories, you know, because I kind of tell these stories that don't get told before and all this sort of stuff. But I kind of resist that now, because actually what they are unheard stories. They're not untold stories. By no means am I the first person to have told any of the stories that I've made films about or done research about. But they haven't been given the due attention, because by you know, whether it's about publishers or TV stations or whatever it is, as they think it's marginal, they don't think it's interesting, they don't think it's important, etc., etc. So it always gets kicked to the sidelines. So bringing forward, you know, same as what you've been doing here, and working with untold stories. You're not the first person to tell these stories, but you're bringing them to new audiences and bringing them to new attention. You know, so yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of kind of denial in Britain when it comes to the Black presence in Britain. Also, the relationship with the slave trade was kind of aggregated in the sense that, you know, we owned the ships, and you know, the Britons, the English were the you know, enslavers, but it didn't happen on British soil. Yeah. It was outsourced to the Caribbean, to the Americas, and all the rest of it. So there's a facade, a very polite, you know, facade that you have on the English landscape, where you get the stately homes. It all looks very genteel and civilized, etc. But you're not seeing the brutality that have funded that, because that's overseas and that's someone else's problem, sort of thing. So there's always been lots of denial, whereas in America is much more in your face. Do you know what I mean? Because the plantations are on the same soil that the people were living. You know, obviously same in the Caribbean, etc. So it's always been a bit of an arm's length distance in the United Kingdom, this relationship. And what that's also helped is, in a way, controlling the narrative about how this is done, because the Britain's able to say, well, we were the abolitionists. We stopped slavery in 1807 and all that. But, you know, so it's a very convenient part of the narrative that wants to be told, but not the narrative of the 400 years that were in between that time. Do you know what I mean? So, yes, it's a complex one, but there's a whole range of different reasons why this history continues to be sidelined. Absolutely.
How do you think that the events in last summer, including the Black Lives Matter protests and also the locally in Bristol, the toppling of the Colston statue, influenced this debate nationally and also locally?
Bristol's a very specific case, and the Colston statue. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, people have been debating that and campaigning for that removal for over 20 years. 1999 was the first time Bristol really publicly acknowledged its history with the slave trade, with the Respectable Trade exhibition in the City Museum. And then certain things have gone on, but they've all been very temporary, never permanent. So lots of fundings have come and gone, fundings, you know, but it's always been temporary. So it's always existed in a vacuum, this information. So when the 7th of June came and the Black Lives Matter protests happened in Bristol last year, you know, there was, you know, the headlines and politicians calling it, you know, mindless vandalism and riots, and they're trying to pin it to different kind of riots or whatever that might have happened in the United States. Where when you look at what happened in Bristol, it's just very specific. There was people on a march. They were, you know, they walked for a distance. They went around the Colston statue, brought it down, put it in the water, and then they carried on the march. They didn't take down anything else. They didn't take down any other statues or road names, and you know that area is surrounded by Colston in road names, etc. So it's a very specific symbolic gesture, really, that I think those people did when they took that down. And obviously, it is controversial. There's no doubt about it. You know, there's people that are against slavery, no lovers of William Colston, that still don't agree that the statue should have been taken down like that. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, it absolutely is a polarizing thing to have happened. You know, Bristol's definitely had a lack of bravery or leadership when it came to that statue. You know, there's been attempts at rewording the plaque, or, you know, they could have taken it down very legally. But actually, I have to say, the younger generation, I was part of those conversations for the last 20 years about what should happen with it. And I wasn't always in favour that it should be taken down. I started off thinking it should be rebadged, you know, replaqued, and a new statue put up close to it. So I've gone on a journey with it. And then I think it's more in 2019 when I wrote an academic paper about it. I think that's when I started to get more comfortable with the idea that it should be just taken down. So my generation have been wringing our hands and trying to work legally around it and having conversations, whereas the younger generation were just like, we've had enough, just let's get the bloody thing down. You know what I mean? And I kind of respect that energy. You know, there's no doubt about the conviction.
So that's thanks very much to Sean, part of a talk we had with him recently. Okay, Christina, shall I hand over to you now?
Yes.
You tell me.
Well, I will just hand it straight to Ellen. So I suggest that we go in this order. So we could go for Ellen and then Jill and then Richard and then to Rolf. And I don't know what is. I think each speaker can decide what is best. I think that Ellen suggested that you click when he says. Yes. Is that okay?
Just going to get Alan's up and ready.
Yes, so thank you again for accepting. We are delighted to have you here with us, and we are very keen on hearing from your experience in Lancaster, because I think there are many similarities, and we look forward to hear about your best practice.
Great, thank you. And it's lovely to be invited. I've got very fond memories of Bath, but also kind of always knew there was this hidden history as well. So today I'm going to talk about Lancaster, Black Lives Matter Now and Then, rescuing Black agency in Lancaster slave history. And I've been involved in Lancaster slave history and trying to rescue Black agency in it really for the last 25 years. And I've led slave site tours of Lancaster, over 100 of them over the last 20 years, well, much more than 100 of them, more than I'd like to mention. And in doing that, we early on developed a slave trail. But the problem with it was that it didn't really have much Black agency in it. And partly that was because the history was still there to be discovered, and very hard to discover some of it. Some of it has only been discovered in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Very exciting development in Lancaster was that we had a Black Lives Matter demonstration early in June, which galvanized. We have quite a small but very small Black population in Lancaster, and they came together, and there was an amazing moment at that demonstration. And in the wake of that demonstration, a Lancaster Black History Group was set up. And this coincided, next slide please, with the development of, my development of a new slave trail with lots of new Black agency in it. And it was designed by Ivan Frontani at the Lancaster Maritime Museum. And I think he did a marvellous job. We've got 22 different stops. We could have had 30 or 40, but we got 22. And one of the things about Lancaster is that it's involved in all stages, really, from lots of slave merchants through the stage of cotton mills, the industrialization, and then at the end, right through to the cotton famine. And we include all those stories here with lots of new Black agency in them. The next slide, please. So this is the other side of it, and as you see, we also talk about fair trade there as well, and that's a legacy, a great legacy of the early work we'd done on earlier slave trail maps. So what I want to really stress about this is that there's lots of other people involved, you know, Global Link, Third World Charities, you know, lots of different things happening. And the idea is that we want to integrate this into modern politics as well. So we take people to places where they can buy fair trade goods as well. You know, it's not merely looking at the past, it's also looking about at exploitation in the present as well. Next slide, please. So this walking tour takes us to many different places, but I also want to talk about kind of Lancaster's history of doing things as well in the last 25 years. So it takes us to the quayside, where we learn about Dodson Foster, who was one of these early Lancaster traders. And in the talk we just heard about Bath, we heard about what great work Quakers did against slavery. Well, in Lancaster, many of the early slave merchants were Quakers, and that's one of the paradoxes we have to deal with, which is, you know, obviously when we talk about this, we talk about the great work Quakers did against slavery, but there are these individuals. Many of them actually turned Anglican, which is another interesting fact. What I want you to show you here is this artwork by Sue Flowers, which was part of an abolished exhibition, and this was at the Maritime Museum. And what she did was she put stencils of Dodson Foster as though as a criminal on the walls of the Maritime Museum, which is an 18th century building, as a means of talking about the historical crime of slavery. Next slide, please. So the beautiful Georgian houses, you might have them in Bath. We got them in Lancaster too. And this is 20 Castle Park, home of the Satterthwaite family. Next slide, please. And we found out there's a baptismal record for Frances Elizabeth Johnson. It's the only written thing about her life. And this memorial is at the Priory. It's the only memorial to a Black individual at the Priory. And yet, like UofBath Abbey, there are many memorials to slave traders and slave merchants in the Priory. Next slide, please. This is Sambo's grave, which is a grave just outside Lancaster, quite an important space and place. Next slide, please. And there are memorials at this grave site. So this is a kind of form of guerrilla memorialization. This is a school children's memorial there, and it's a beautiful piece, and it was organic, so it went back down into the earth. People had always left stones at the grave, and this was a way of doing that. And I can talk more about Sambo and the grave site, and obviously that name is a controversial name, and we need to talk about that, but I don't have time here in this short period. Next slide, please. The Slave Trade Arts Memorial Project was a project which led to the building of the first quayside memorial in Britain, in Lancaster. So we've had lots of, next slide please, we've had lots of really good work on slavery here. Next slide please. There's Kevin Dawden Johnson, who designed the memorial. Next slide please. So this is Harry Hind. Now in the Priory, there is a memorial to his masters and his master's brother, Thomas and James Hind. And there's nothing for Harry. This only came about in 2018, this knowledge about Harry Hind. So this is a runaway slave narrative. So we're starting to try and tell the story of these slaves who have agency. Next slide, please. And here, now this is an unbelievable story. Here is an Ibu boy owned by a clergyman in the Heysham, a town just outside Lancaster. He was an Ibu boy. He has African scarification marks on his face. So he was born and inducted into his group there. And here he is in Lancaster with a broad Lancashire dialect. African scarification marks and a broad Lancashire dialect. I think this is the first document which shows a Black person in Lancashire speaking with a Lancashire dialect. Next slide, please. And yes, we were talking about Black agency. We don't talk just about slavery. I saw you had Ira Aldridge, because obviously he played in the theatre in Bath. He played in our theatre too. He got very good reviews and was the first Black man to play Othello. Next slide, please. And we had abolitionists, not many in Lancaster, and that's partly, I think, because of its legacy of slavery. But Moses Roper spoke there too, and a few other abolitionists spoke. So this is again showing the idea of Black agency through the tour and the trail. Next slide, please. So I'm also a curator, and I'm curating an exhibition at the moment for the artist Labena Hamid, who won the Turner Prize in 2017, and it's called Memorial to Zong. And you can find an online exhibition, so you can look at it. If you go visit Lancaster Memorial to Zong, you can see that yourselves. Also, a very exciting thing: if you go visit Lancaster and go maps, the second map you come to is a map of the slave trail, and I'm very, very proud of that. So what I'm trying to show you here really is that, you know, it's about activism and the way in which we can use activism to change what happens on the ground, to change people's ideas about this history, to make it a history about all people in these spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was very inspiring and somehow very parallel to our experience in Bath and how complex these stories are. That actually sometimes the same person who is an abolitionist is also involved in is also a slave owner, and and sometimes even yeah. So these are very, very complex stories, and I think art has been used to great effect to make those stories visible in the public space. So I would like to hand it over to Jill now. So if you could please switch your camera on.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Jill, do you have slides? You're going to share your own?
I'm going to share my screen, yeah, if that's okay.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, there we go. Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. So my name's Jill Sutherland, and I'm a PhD student. I look at curatorial perspectives on audience engagement, particularly in smaller museums in the Southwest. And I currently have been working at the Holborn Museum for the past year or so, with a bit more time on top of that due to COVID, working on looking at our permanent displays there and how the interpretation currently is presented. And also I've been curating a new permanent display. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience doing this at the Holborn, but also my sort of general thoughts on decolonizing in the museum world, I suppose. So Nicole at the beginning already sort of went through definitions of what decolonizing and the decolonial means. And I just think it is worth saying that it is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, as I'm sure you all agree. And I think it's important to really think about what we mean when we say it, because it means different things to different people. So yeah, we can view it as an historical moment. We can view it as rejecting traditional imperialist and colonial ideologies. We can see it as transforming power relations, but also we can see it as looking at a more collective sense of humanity that's global and international, rather than just looking at single country histories, if you like, or single race histories. It can be innovative and about originality, and it's, I think, a move from hegemonic status to something that's more multiplicitous, shall we say. Okay. So current talks in the museum world are, I think, quite centered around the repatriation of objects and where objects came from, how museums were founded, and where the money sort of came from with regards to the slave trade. And I think, while those are really important aspects to consider when thinking about decolonizing, they don't actually apply to all museums. So for example, if we take a small museum in a rural village, maybe somewhere in the Southwest, let's say Devon, they might not possess an object from Africa where we can talk about repatriation or how culture has been appropriated there. And instead, their collection might be made up of objects donated by members of the local population. So how can we sort of talk about repatriation there? How does decolonizing play into a museum like that? And what other things could the museums that the first three aspects apply to also be thinking about if decolonizing is under discussion? And to that, I would say those things in the middle. Let's think about, our narratives. What stories are we telling? What are the people? What do they look like? The people on the walls in our museums, local, regional, national, or not? And also the physical arrangement of our displays, you might not think can be decolonized, but as I'll show you, they can, I think. And I think to think about these sort of issues in the middle is to think about the social context of objects in museums. And when we start thinking about social context, that means we need to think about social history. So for me, decolonizing museums requires understanding Britain's social history. And that can be applied to a museum that doesn't have objects that need to be debated about whether they should remain in situ or not. it's also about recognising the ongoing legacy of colonialism. As Alan's talk sort of also said, it's about connecting issues from the past to now. So with this kind of social aspect in mind, at the Holborn Museum, there's a picture of it there. We had an introduction earlier. It was founded in 1893. It's at the end of the very grand Great Pulteney Street in Bath. It moved to this present building in 1916, and the collection was founded, initially collected by Mary Ann Barbara, who was a sister of William Holborn, who the museum is now named after. She bequeathed it to him. And the collection is it shows examples of what we would call as our decorative arts. So paintings, ceramics, there's metalware and spoons and things like that. So on my walk around, when I was sort of doing my initial review, looking for objects to potentially redisplay or ways to improve the current interpretation, I came across this gallery. Currently, it is focused on arts and elegance in Georgian Bath. It's all about sort of taste, luxury, goods that were imported, so tea, sugar, and you can see that case there. It's got sort of like teapots, plates, tea memorabilia, and in those drawers we've got some spoons and things like that. And when I opened the drawer that's circled there, the drawer is entitled Sugar and Slavery, and I discovered this book inside the drawer. So this is the plantation book that I decided would be a great thing to bring out and redisplay. So the current display, as you can see on the top right, it's covered with glass, it's laid flat on top of the Brooks image, that traditional image of slaves squashed sort of into a ship. That's the current place where the book lives, shall we say. An interesting thing about this book as well is that pages have been cut out, which I find, well, when I realised this, not only the current display, but also the fact that pages were missing, it just really sort of spoke to me as representative of this complete lack of history in our museums and actually at the Holborn Museum. When I joined, there wasn't an awful lot that talked about connections to the slave trade or where the sugar really came from. And I just thought this has to come out. And I think it's very poignant, the fact that the pages are missing. We don't actually know why. And I should also explain that books like this would have been used by the plantation owners or whoever was running a plantation at the time to take note of the names of slaves, potentially their productivity, the products that were coming in and out of the plantation. The reason why we have this book is because William Holborn's great-grandfather, called Guy Ball, actually owned this plantation for a time in Barbados in the 1720s. And this is the inside of the book. So if I just quickly flick back, you wouldn't have known from that display how it looks really on the inside. That's how kind of, I don't know, savagely cut it was. One page remains, which just lists some products, cocoa, beef and candles. There's no names left in the book. So that is a huge part of history that's missing potentially for people from Barbados who are trying to look for their family histories. So in this redisplay, it's going to have its own case and it will have a backdrop rather than this current sort of backdrop, which is they're sort of cartoons, illustrations that are satirical, poking fun at fashionable Georgian Bath. It's all about sort of taste and consumption. Rather than that, the book will have its own case. And quite a few of those figures on the right have actually been mentioned and feature in the walk, which is interesting. The backdrop will acknowledge the links between the Holborn family and Caribbean plantations through their marriages, through their naval links, and it will show that there were people around at the time who resisted colonialism, who resisted slavery, and who campaigned. But in this display, the aim is to show that it wasn't just white individuals that did this, it was black and white individuals. And they came together to sort of fight racism, essentially, which I think we can relate to today. Though I would say there are three main themes to this. The first one is acceptance. So acceptance that the Holborn family were involved with the slave trade, and these are the reasons why and how, and accepting that and feeling confident. So everyone at the museum can sort of not be scared about admitting it. It's kind of there for everyone to see. The second theme is remembrance. So remembrance for the lost history, to reclaim that sort of silence about those narratives and to recover a sense of identity for people of colour. And then the third theme I would say is empowerment. So I hope that it will instill an empowering sense of unity and a connection to British society today. So I think in terms of challenges, there has been a bit of resistance, as one might expect. Let's see, I'll go back to that in a minute. So yeah, there's been resistance in a few forms. Firstly, I'd say overt resistance, where people that I've come into contact with about this have said that slavery is in the past and it's something that isn't an issue now, we don't need to talk about it. I've had very sort of covert resistance, as in not intentional, where I haven't maybe felt very heard in terms of how to deal with these topics, or the object maybe hasn't been given, I think, an appropriate level of respect in conversations. There's been difficulty with language, so it's been described as a celebratory opportunity, bringing this book out, and it's an exciting opportunity. And while I do think that it is exciting to finally have exposure to something like this, I think using language like exciting and celebratory are quite difficult when it comes to a document that can be quite painful to a lot of people. I think another issue is perhaps fear and shame. So colleagues have been afraid of getting things wrong. I've been scared of sort of being direct, and we've had to negotiate ways to understand each other and talk about it. And I feel like persistence has helped, but also introducing voices of those affected. So I did actually speak to a group of African and Caribbean students about this display, and I recorded it with their permission. And it was a really frank, open, honest conversation, and I shared that with my colleagues at the museum, and I think that combined with the Black Lives Matter protests of last summer, that really sort of showed the need for something like this. So it wasn't just me, the single voice. So I think introducing other people into the conversation is a really good way to help deal with these issues internally. And I also have collaborated with Barbados Museum on the display, so they have been putting a little bit of interpretation together for us, and we've been discussing about reproducing some names of enslaved people from the plantation on the plinth of the book as a memorial, as a way of showing respect to the people who are missing. So my last slide is, I would say ultimately decolonizing is just about telling the truth. It's about telling the whole truth. And I would encourage museums to think about who is best placed to communicate this. how best to present it. How can we view this dealing with issues of decolonizing as an opportunity to be innovative, and rather than thinking of it as a debate, pitting sort of one side against the other, where you might think that you're dividing audiences into who is racist and who is not racist, or who is woke or who is nationalist. I think we should try and think more of it as an opportunity to change people's minds, or giving people the opportunity to change their minds, our minds. I mean, and by that I also mean my perception of myself, our perceptions of ourselves as people of colour, and your perceptions of us. Opportunities for us to share, to acknowledge our shared history. And ultimately, I think it's about recovering something that's been lost, erased, omitted, cut out, ignored, and silenced. And I'll just end by saying, because I don't want to obviously take up too much time, I'll just end by saying that I think part of the fear is loss. I feel that a lot of people I've spoken to who are not people of colour feel that there's something to be lost and that something's being attacked. And I think, I'm not really sure why that feels, why they feel that way. I think the only thing that's going to be lost here is exclusivity, exclusive rights, and preferential treatment. I mean, we all like to feel special, totally get that, but I mean, we all deserve to feel special too. So yeah, I'm gonna end that there, I think.
Thank you very much, Jill, for this great insight of what is happening in the Holborn Museum, and what a powerful metaphor of this book with the cutout pages. And I really like the idea of the collaboration with museums in Barbados to have various sides of the history. So let's continue with Richard White, who has been exploring Bath's history through walking way before us, and who has been very nicely sharing his time and very generously offering us help and support with this project. So how would you like to proceed, Richard? Would you like to?
Yeah, I'll share screen.
Great.
So if we go, whilst I'm just clicking around, I'd just like to say that that was a really beautiful, brilliant presentation that we just heard from Jill. And I've been in the museum. We've walked in that space, and there's that moment where you kind of look around that corner of the room, and it's all about. It barely even mentions the sugar. And then you've got to kind of dig down, and then finally, if you're alert enough, people will find that drawer. It's very well hidden away. So it's brilliant that you're putting that in a wider context and getting it out and showing it. So thank you for that. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this fantastic project. Thank you, Alan, for your contributions earlier. I want to begin with really kind of, it's about my name. So my name is Richard White. So I don't carry a name that was stamped on me by an owner. I just have inherited that name, but it is of significance in terms of what we're talking about. And I want to acknowledge the privilege that I've grown up with as a white man. And to say in this context, very much, I'm learning about all sorts of things, but I still am very much learning here and now. I grew up in rural Dorset in pretty much a kind of entirely white world, talked about heroes of the empire, and much to say about that. Some of it is about privilege, but some of it I'm really realizing is loss. You know, it's in a bizarre way. I had an underprivileged childhood in terms of access to other ways of seeing and other ways of knowing. So I just wanted to begin by acknowledging that, and certainly that we live in a city that privilege is manifest in the buildings. So Christina, you asked us to think about a whole load of questions. You distilled it at the start of the session. I wanted to address two of those questions. And I'm doing it very broadly in the context of work that I've been doing. I've lived in Bath now for 17 years. You know, that's a mere kind of sneeze in terms of some people's view of how long you need to live in Bath to be able to say something about it. But when I moved here, I was more than just struck by the beauty of the architecture, but also just that question: where did it come from? Who paid for it? Where did this sudden, burst of wealth, where did it come from? And the work the creative work that I've been doing, mainly it's around walking, has involved a kind of a discovery of that. And one of the things that discovery has been about is this silence that nobody wants to talk about it. Up until last summer, there was nothing on any of the heritage websites. There was nothing on Bath Preservation Society website. There was nothing in and so on and so on. So much has changed in a very short period of time. Other people have been doing this. Sean did an amazing project. If you dig into Bath Record Office, there's an amazing project about the hidden black presence in Bath, and brought out some of the stories of people that we've seen some of their faces earlier on. But even now, if you go to the World Heritage Site of Bath, there is nothing about this. So a bit about silence first of all, and then I'll say a bit about art. So the first question: how does this silence impact on our city? Well, first of all, as was said in the chat, and Jill kind of alluded to it, it's not just a general silence. It seems to me that it's a white silence. That lots of people that I talk to who are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, that somebody knows, they'll know something about it. There will be a story that you can kind of tap into. The story of a Fairfield House, for instance, and Haile Selassie and all of that kind of stuff, that those are, it's kind of, there's part of the story nobody talks about. And then some people know the richness of Black experience in Bath. I think it's more of a question about, well, so what's the consequence of this silence? So Edward Said, he famously picked up on Jane Austen talking about the dead silence in Mansfield Park. And it's like that. It kind of, you ask a question, you make a point, and it kind of, boom, and it absorbs it. And I really hope in the last 12 months, what has happened is that these things are beginning to be opened up. But I'd like to particularly address the silence as far as Bath as a World Heritage Site. So this is a city that stands facing the world, a city of empire, a city of beautiful buildings, a city that's kind of co-opted Jane Austen, that has nothing to say about where the money comes from. And as we've seen, and I'll add my tuppence into it, you don't have to dig all that deep to see the databases of slave ownership, of the plantations. You don't have to dig all that deep to find out the wealth that flowed in from empire, East India Company, West India Company, and so on. And what I was really struck by is, so there's this big project that's been running, not quite as long as Bath has been a World Heritage Site. So while Bath has been a World Heritage Site since 1987, since 1994, there's been a project running by UNESCO, hosted by UNESCO, the Slave Route Project. And this is its kind of master statement. Ignorance or concealment of major historical events constitutes an obstacle to mutual understanding, reconciliation, and cooperation among peoples. So we look at that as this is the kind of the manifesto of the project. Now, contribute to a better understanding of the causes, forms of operation, stakes, and consequences. Where's Bath? Why is there nothing about Bath in this at all? And it just here is this moment. We have a moment now when we can make those kind of connections and we can tell those stories. And I'm really very proud and excited to be associated with the MAP project. I think the students, young people that have been involved in that have done an astonishing job. And I really hope that this now rolls out. I see Bathscape has already pledged that they'll put it up on for the Walking Festival. And I hope all the different organisations here will kind of take it on and develop it. It's a beginning that continues. So what is the consequence of that silence? Well, one of the consequences of that silence is Bath as a city where I live, and I'm quite proud to live in Bath, is diminished. The consequence of that silence is all the stories of the resistance and the campaigns that kind of turns into ideas of human rights and all of that kind of stuff, all of that gets lost. Nobody, you know, all we get is the kind of the white hero, Wilberforce, but you don't hear any of the rest of it. What are the consequences of that silence for people? Well, it just allows racism to grow. It just nods to it. You know, that we've had in Bath not so long ago, a secondary school, where some white kids staged some kind of slave auction. It's appalling. It seeps in. If you don't talk about it, it grows. And I hope we're at a stage this year feels like we're moving on that. At least we're talking about institutional racism. At least we're talking about decolonisation in that kind of broad and rather fluffy way, but at least it's something that we're starting to kind of talk about. So that's my thought on silence. I want to move on and say a little bit now about being an artist. So my work is creative work is as a walking artist, a movement artist. I'm very interested in how we learn differently and think differently when we're walking. And I'm particularly interested in what happens in that moment of kind of almost involuntary, when we stumble upon something, when a new idea comes into our head, what then happens? How does that process develop? So in this kind of work, I offered a project back in 2017, and it's kind of continued, Sweet Waters, which was very much, as it says there, it's about sensing legacies of slave ownership in Bath and along the River Avon. I began, and again, this is not we're talking about 4 years ago now. This information is it's out there. So I went into the UCL database and very quickly came up with, so this is a Google map that I did. And if you joined up the dots, you get a fairly similar kind of circuit as the circuit that we now see on that beautiful map that we started with. So, you know, Bath is pretty awash, and all this is a snapshot. This is the snapshot at the end of the status of slavery and the great payout of taxpayers' money to the slave owners, not a penny of which went to the enslaved people. And there's never even been an apology. Now, if you think how fast the Allies turned around Nazi Germany, and reparations were paid out, you know, my mother-in-law had reparations. So within a lifetime, reparations were being paid out. Not a penny's been paid out. And then I began imagining. And so try this one. If you imagine, so we've seen the shape, I don't know if you see my cursor there. So you've seen the triangle, the famous gruesome triangle of that trade in captured and enslaved people and the return of their wealth, the return of the wealth that those people had generated. And then I kind of mapped that onto sort of, I don't know, the water cycle, because it struck me, well, water connects the whole lot. So in the middle of the Atlantic there, you know, I don't know, 2 million, 3 million, something like that, a lot of people, their lives were ended or their bodies were dumped. And then you think about, well, the weather, where does the weather come from? When we get weather, when it's wet weather, it blows in off the Atlantic. And I just began to kind of think about that idea that in a raindrop carries the entire history of the universe. So the raindrop also is carrying that story of colonization, that story of murder, and it rains on me in Bath. And I then walked with those ideas. So we began at Holborn, so what we've got in Bath, and another reason why it needs to be speaking to and standing there and telling its story. At one end, we've got the wealth that's manifest in the famous Byam portrait, slave owner, although the Holborn stewards very often won't tell you anything about it. Last time I was there, I noticed they changed the captions. Contrasted with what else was going on. So it's not just the wealth that was coming in Bath and along the river. They were making stuff that was going out on the slave ships from Bristol. So up the road in the Woolly Valley, they were making gunpowder from the night soil that came out of the gentlemen of Bath. Not that distance on the edge of Bath, and then all the way down the river, there were brass mills. If you've not visited Saltford Brass Mill, I really encourage you to do so. One of the few institutions over the years that's actually out about it. You know, this is what we did, and as Jill said, quite really relaxed about it. Well, so that's what happened. Now we need to talk about it. So down at Keynsham, they were making manillas, and I suggested this is like it was the mint of the slave trade. They were making the currency, the wearable currency of the slave trade. So we walked, and I dropped these ideas in at different points as we walked. We went and stood outside houses. I posted little postcards into the homes of the former homes of former residences of slave owners, and we walked. And we thought, and we stumbled, and ideas and responses began to develop. I invited people to keep notebooks. We shared stuff on social media at points where we stopped. And I tracked our movement. This is a piece I was going to show it, but I think the quality won't work. There is a video that I've made that runs through all of these points. So these are the walks of Sweetwaters. Each of those blue points are Twitter postings. They're photographs that people have taken, their scans and things like that at different points where we stopped. People kind of responding in the moment to that kind of what it made them think of and how what it meant to them. And we walked all the way down in fits and starts, all the way down to the Avonmouth Bridge. And then on Midsummer's Day in June 2017, we walked the journey all the way back up the river again in one go, kind of as a sort of an endurance, as a kind of resonance of that journey down the river that captured people would have taken. That was how people were shifted down to the ports and then enslaved at the other end, walked often up the river to where they were going to be forced to work. And it happened to be a very, very hot day, and there was much talk and much, an embodied learning process that was going on. People shared their notebooks and shared their thoughts, and I rotated the notebooks around, so they generated these wonderful pieces of art, which I did was an exhibition and installation at the end of it all. And here we are. I made some video work. This is now at Saltford Brass Mill, and I projected some of I was walking with a GoPro camera on me, and I scanned some documentation from the record office and made a sound and video installation. So what is the role of the artist? Well, I don't know what the role of an artist is, but I can tell you what I do and what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is to create a space, to create an experience whereby people become story carriers, that they carry on that story. So, for instance, people said to me, you know, I didn't know this. A tour guide joined one of the walks I did. She said, this is not my script. There were several Black people who had grown up in Bath, and they said they never told us this about Bath. So it's kind of people discovering their city, discovering how they respond to that whole, you know, we did quite a bit of work kind of exploring that being in that uncomfortable space of being white. And how do you kind of work that one through? So walking and questioning, that was much of the process, making and doing stuff, but also, and I think fundamentally, it's a somatic experience. It's about that bit of moving and walking and sensing and experiencing in a different way. This is not a museum experience. This isn't a reading out of a book experience learning. This is about learning and discovering and thinking live with other people and sensing it with our whole bodies. And so, you know, so there were points where we ate bitter chocolate. There were points where we were so hot and exhausted. There were points where we were cold and the wind was blowing in our faces. So it's about embodied learning. And I offer that in terms of the map, the walking map, as a way of experiencing that. It's not just simply joining the dots. It's actually about doing the walking and inviting the thinking. And I'd just like to, if I can, one last slide. I see Kristen is there. One last slide. So if you can read that, this is one of the many responses that I got from walkers that join me. May well be that some of the walkers that join me are on the call this evening. So this is what this person said, who really didn't know very much. It completely transformed the way that I saw and understood the city that I grew up in and now live in as an adult. It's fascinating to see how we can make huge aspects of history disappear because they are uncomfortable. It also led me to have insights about current day exploitation in completely different ways by people who have large amounts of money around the world. So it is uncomfortable. It's particularly uncomfortable for white people, or for me as a white person, but now is the time to bring that out and work it through. There is reparation, there's social repair to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for this insight. And I think that there have been some comments that we all learned a lot from walking with you and this works. So we are becoming story carriers, and we are working on turning more and more people into that. So I'm noticing that we are a bit behind our schedules. So I don't want to cause any further delays, and I pass it on then to Ralph, who will maybe. Ralph, can you please switch your camera on and tell us whether you want to share your screen?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so my name is Ralph from this period. I live in Montreal, Canada, and I'm an artist working in art center. And this is downtown Montreal. And then this is the map of Montreal, but we are located in east of Montreal. It's called Saint-Michel. This is a neighborhood of mostly of immigrants people. This is a poor area. 49% of inhabitants are immigrants. And then most of people are between 20 and 44 years old. They have low revenue, about $24,000, less than Montreal. It's $35,000. And then this is the center. We do like education, immigration, youth, family, women, and we have an art center. This is a new building. We are 4 years old. We just built it, but we have a center. We are 50 years old in Montreal. Most of our clientele is from immigrants people. They are from Africa, West Indies, North Africa, and Asian people. This is a summer camp for some of them. And then this is the art center. Because of the COVID-19, we decided to do everything online. Most of our clientele is from immigrants people. And then I decided to be much more interested about slavery because Haiti is one of the islands was a big revolution. But when I came in Montreal 20 years ago, I saw that there's a lack of knowledge about slavery, African history in Canada. So I decided to do some workshop to introduce the story of slavery. Now this is a famous from Guadeloupe, West Indies. It's decolonized. It's showing like a slave as an object in the forest. This is the art center. We do promote like Black art in the art center. And then what we do to teach those kids history is like we do like workshop about African instrument. And then we tell about this story at the same time. This is a recycle can. Recycle object. At the same time, we try to tell them the story of a Black African in Canada. At the same time, so we understood that the kids, it's very much like the technology. We try to integrate history and technology with them too. This is an example, it's the collage we do with the kids there at the summer camp. At the same time, we taught them history of Haitian revolution through visual art. We make them do photograph as being an actor of the revolution. And then we manipulate with Photoshop and they draw, they color it, while we teach them the history of slavery. This is Toussaint Louverture, one of the leading Haitian revolutionary. So because of the lack of knowledge, the gap between technology and then the poor neighborhood, I create an organization with space they can learn about technology, and then we do like research, and then this is in the COVID-19, we teach them how to make a shade mask. So what I see in those kids, they didn't know nothing about Canadian history, about the First Nation, about Black history, and then about the Haitian history. So this is why I decided to, while I'm doing art with them, and then we have projects they can learn about their history. We try to like have a 360 photograph they can, and then learn about the Haitian history and Canadian history. Since they love technology, and it's the best way they can learn it. What we try to do is working with a neighborhood first to make, this is a poor neighborhood, make them to understand where they come from. since there are other artists who work with mainstream, with museum, but we, as an organization, we work with the ground, with people from that neighborhood. Our next project will be teach them projection mapping. Now we can have a project to each community from the neighborhood can project their own history about their own community. This is one of my art. This is a recycled art. Those sculpture was homage to people who have been died in the transatlantic slavery. It's made from 3D print and beads. This is a collage, scanning beads and print. Projection mapping on the building of Maison d'Haïti. And then my last work, they invite me in February to decorate the art center windows. So I decided to show 3 personages of this Canadian slavery. It was in the middle, it's the first slave registered in Canada. It was Olivier, it was 11 years old. And then the woman was Marie-Joseph Angélique. They accused her of burning Montreal, and then they executed her. And then this is Joe, the pressman. He worked in the press, but each time he tried to liberate himself, but they catch him. So this is a way, hopefully for the COVID situation, they asked me to decorate the windows. So it's better. So people outside can ask who is those personages, and then they can learn about that. So school will come and then they will learn about the slavery in Canada. Okay, this is more or less, this is what I have to say. So this is my work I was doing in Montreal. So thank you for inviting me, Priscilla.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing these amazing artworks with us, which are very relevant to this attempt to make the past visible in the public space. And I wonder if we could have all the speakers visible now, and we could maybe look at the questions that we received, and maybe we could also try to think about how these things happening in different places in Britain as well as in the world resonate with us, which is somehow a quite interesting time that we live since last summer. Somehow the more immobile we become with COVID and the lockdown, the more we are also in a kind of global situation in which we are all faced with how to decolonize the past, how to make the past visible, and debates that are local are becoming global in a way that has never been seen before. So I would like you to react to each other, and we could maybe also a student from the team who was in charge of collecting questions that have been asked throughout, because the chat is quite long and it is difficult to look at it spontaneously. So Max, could you sum up some of the questions that came to each speaker and to the group as well?
Yes. So I'll start with the ones that were specifically addressed to some of our speakers. Sorry, just having a scroll. So for Alan, how involved has the local authority been in the work you're doing in Lancaster, and has there been broad support for the public artworks from the public, or have you had to fight for them?
Very good question. The local council sways between different political parties, but often it's not been unsupportive, but there tends to be peaks of support and troughs of support. The memorial itself, there was quite a large resistance to it going up, but we managed to overcome that, and it's become quite a place that people think and know about as a place to think about slavery. So that's been really useful. More recently, the Black Lives Matter impetus has really galvanized the council, and they've actually, if you look on the Visit Lancaster page, on the first page we've got the slave trade map there. There's been money for a translation into Arabic of the slave trail. So I think what the important thing is that, yes, they are supportive, but they need to be pushed, and you have to be there pushing them. And we're really lucky now with the Lancaster Black History Group, which I'm a member of, but which has constitutionally is half and half. You know, it doesn't allow itself to have more than half the office holders to be white. And we're using the trail for really innovative projects. We have at the moment 40 community historians doing history on all of and 7 different families being organised for a project. And the Lancaster Black History Group got £25,000 for that project within 2 months of constituting. So it's a very active kind of group who are doing some amazing work, and we're finding out new facts to put into new slave trails, so that we don't see the slave trail as a finished document. We see it as a document in process, and these local historians, who are just local folk, are finding out new things to put in there, and it's a really dynamic and exciting time to be around. Sometimes I felt kind of quite like isolated doing this work, but more recently it's become really exciting, and I think a lot of that's to do with the impetus of Black Lives Matter. So it's been great for us. It really has. And I think another thing to say is that the Priory, where those mainly white memorials has got a new memorial project to have a memorial for the African people who were baptized in that place, and we're working with them. The Judges' Lodging has a portraits project ongoing, where they're going to make portraits of some of these anonymous, we don't know what these people look like, but they're going to use black artists to have portraits of the runaway slaves. So there's an awful lot of really exciting activity happening at the moment.
That's also very interesting to see how you have involved various people in co-creating the monument and co-creating the trail. And I really wonder how we can reach out to various people and involve various voices, because I think that nobody feels completely legitimate to carry this alone. And I think maybe cities like Bristol, where there is a larger community of people of African heritage, it's easier to have groups like that than in Bath. But maybe you have other ideas or other thoughts about that.
Yeah. No,
so how to co-create with people.
I mean, what started it for me was taking people on the trails, and you'll find this when once you start taking people on the trails, they're wanting to co-create, they're wanting to go out and find out about things. The act of walking in together, being told a portion of a history, and they'll ask me a question. I go, well, we don't know that yet, and they'll go, oh well, maybe if we look there, and I think, oh, well, I hadn't thought of looking there because I haven't lived in Lancaster all my life, you know. So I think it's about that. It's about having trust in these people you're taking on these tours, and about the co-creation of knowledge as well as art.
Jill, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for Alan, actually. And I apologise if you've already covered this, but I just wondered who you are aiming your walks at. So who in your mind are the walks for? Are they for everyone? Are they specifically for, you know, the white population to sort of get to grips with these issues, just out of interest?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I didn't, you know, I started just doing the walks when people asked me. And often actually they'd be for non-British people, like African-American students coming over, Caribbean people over for a conference, or, you know, and then I've done them for Preston Black History Group, you know, who are an older Black History Group than Lancaster Black History Group. I think that they were set up, and I've set them up really at first to make sure that Lancaster people knew this history for themselves. But they very rapidly became, I've taken people from all over the world on them, and actually I like it best when there's a mixed audience of people from very different experiences. And the worst, one of the problems is that historically some of these walks were taken by local historians. And they take people around on them, and they might be very good local historians, and they just add their bits about a slave who lived here or something. And that's the worst way to do it. That is the worst way to do it. And that's the problematic, is actually that kind of, you know, oh, I can just, this is a nice little bit of added extra. You have to really know and own this history a little bit, a lot yourself, before you can even start going out there. And it takes an awful lot of knowledge about specifics of slave history in, you know, world history and lots of things. So I'm actually training people to do the walk now. But I think the thing they have to do, the thing I learned how to do, is to say, I don't know, quite often, you know, and to actually own I don't know, you know, because once you start wanting to give this talks about slavery, you don't just need to know about Lancaster or Bath. You need to start knowing about world history. You need to knowing about Black history, and you know, God, there's a lot out there. But you know,
I'm just sort of laughing, not to interrupt you, but I'm laughing because in terms of the project I've been doing at the Holborn, I mean, so I'm not an expert on colonial history. I'm not an expert on Caribbean plantations. Both my parents are from the Caribbean, but I haven't fully looked into the history. But for the purposes of this display, you know, I've had to become a historian. I've had to look. And yeah, I mean, the information's there, as Sean Sobers said earlier on, but it's the looking. There has to be the desire to look, and there has to be the I think the capacity to keep going. It's not something that you can just look at, tick, it's done, and move on. It takes hard work, and I think that's part of the issue. That's part of the resistance to it, is that it takes hard work. I just wanted to add about your interest from local historians, and the fact that local historians are helping you with your talk now. Just in contrast, like I have an example in my research, a curator I spoke to, he's sort of prides himself on being a local historian. And in the interview, when it came up in conversation about Black history locally, and you know, he said, well, if the history was here, we'd talk about it. His location was 6.5 miles from a port town, which traded enslaved people and products like wool, ivory, gold in the 18th century. And his location was 11.5 miles from a sugar processing factory. And he didn't, as a local historian, you know, he wasn't aware of this history. It's there. It's also in, you know, the street names, statues, pub signs, but it had never occurred to this local historian and this curator to look for it. And I think, I'm not really sure where the blame lies there, because I don't think anyone in Britain has been encouraged to look for this aspect of our shared history with any great sort of impetus until now. Maybe.
Richard, I saw your hand up. Would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from Jill, really. You know, never mind 6 miles down the road, it's absolutely on our doorstep. You know, why there's you look at the street names, you look at Pulteney, you know, that whole Pulteney estate. You look at Beckford's tower kind of stands over overlooks the city, and then you look at the kind of workplace names. You've got brass mills, you've got gunpowder mills, and so on. You know, there's a deliberate act of ignorance amongst those local historians, that they will very happily go into the fine detail of you know, well, what somebody was wearing or whatever. You know, there's nothing wrong with that kind of history. But if you are owning, as a local historian does, a kind of a history of the town that you're living in, it's right there on the doorstep.
Do you really think it's deliberate?
I do. You know, if you're fascinated in the past and how things come to be, which generally, what I find if I talk to historians, that's what they're interested in, is why is that there and how did that come to be and so on. There's like it's turning a blind eye. You know, famously, it's the story of Nelson. You know, who putting his telescope up to his blind eye. I do think there's a deliberateness about it, and a deliberate obfuscation of it. I was at an event a couple of weeks back. Sorry, it's very parochial for the people that are not Bath, but Larkhall History Society. Fascinating presentation about Pulteney, where he got his money from, all the story of Pulteney's plantations and speculation on stolen land in what became the United States, all of that kind of stuff. And it gets to Pulteney Bridge, and one of the kind of the interventions was from a local historian who was at pains to explain why Pulteney Bridge could not have possibly been paid for out of revenue that Pulteney got from his plantations. You know, it's deliberate.
I just wanted to add there, if it's okay, that I also think sometimes it is a bit unintentional. I don't know why I'm making excuses, but I think it means that they're not bad people. Like, you know, you're not a bad person if you haven't thought about it before. You haven't been encouraged to. I mean, yes, we have autonomy, and really, why wouldn't you look into why people are in this country, and why wouldn't you want to make an informed decision about Britain before you decide that you feel proud of it? That's my view, but yeah, I don't know. I think there's sort of a lot of responsibility also lies with the media and the government. I mean, yeah, I just think autonomy in terms of looking into our pasts in this country hasn't been encouraged. It's not an excuse, but I think it doesn't make everyone a bad person if you've never thought about it before. If you've never thought about white privilege before, for example, it doesn't make you a bad person. I just want to say that. Yeah,
I would really like to ask, thank all those 90 people who are still with us for this overtime that we are all doing. So thank you so much for your thoughts. And I really wonder if you could give us some advice or comments on our map and our project and our walk, and maybe the same thing for the audience. So we got some questions on the walk. We really started out with these white privilege ideas, and we really tried to decolonize ourselves first, and we tried to do that with art methods, and we did some creative work around that really helped us, I think. We also have a survey online, so we would really appreciate to have more feedback using the survey. That would be really precious. we have some plans to turn it into a walkable app, as well as a printable map. And probably it's going to be an evolutive process as well, because we could add much more, but we try to make it printable, and it's very limited what you can put on an A3 size map. But maybe you have some ideas for us, and maybe some criticisms that can help us improve. So I see one question: how to engage with local communities. So this is something we could try to answer, but maybe we could take a bunch of questions on that. So any ideas and comments from the panelists first, and then whoever else wants, you can also drop your questions in the chat. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, I think it's I think the map looks really, really good. The Bath map, and I think the thing that gets to me really is that the figures are often the same figures who are recurring because they're really important. People like Ira Aldridge, the first black man to play Othello, and that's really, really good. And I think that for me, it shows that this black history that we have is a kind of national history, and there are national figures walking in and out. Equiano's in Manchester, is in Bath, is in Bristol. Frederick Douglass is all over the place. Moses Roper did 1,500 talks. You know, he came from America, did 1,500 talks all over the place. Henry Box Brown jumped out of his box here, there, and everywhere to show how he'd escaped from slavery. So I think that's really strong. We shouldn't be worried about this repetition of these histories. But the other thing is there are very, very specific histories as well. And that's the thing I love about your Bath map. There's really some great specific histories. And I just wanted to share a specific history from Lancaster, just because I think it's quite important, because ramifications happened in Black History Month. So the Abraham Rawlinson's memorial was graffitied after Black Lives Matter with the word slave trader, you know, sort of an act of guerrilla memorialization. And it was just so important that what the Priory did next, what they did next was not to scrub it off. What they did next was to leave it on there because it was true, and then to say we will scrub this off when we have a memorial for the victims of transatlantic slavery in that space as well. And I think that was a good, you know, and so there's a committee now, and we're trying to work towards a new memorial there. But I think that was a very powerful act, and I think that actually that's, you know, the thing is that once you have a trail there, people can start thinking about powerful acts. They can start thinking about, gosh, that's, you know, what do I do about that memorial there? And for people that might think that is an extreme thing to do to someone's grave, Rawlinson was the MP for the city, and he actually worked against abolition in Parliament, and he owned plantations in the West Indies and was a slave merchant. You know, he is a global criminal. You know, and yes, we need to be careful about these things, because retributive acts happen to black graves after these things happen. But actually, that stand, I think, was a really important one from the people at the Priory to say, well, you know, we're not just going to immediately get the scrubbing brush out. Let's show this for a while until we can do something that shows that we have a different way of looking at this, that we can memorialize the Black lives lost. I thought that was something I wanted to share.
Thank you. I wonder if we received any artwork then on the Padlet from anybody doing the collaging, or some art engagement with our discussion.
Hi, yes, we've had a few submissions. I can share the screen if that would be nice. Just bear with me. Can you guys see that?
It would be easier to, like, if you could see them one by one. Wow, that's really nice. The color one, the color, the second, the first.
So this one's been submitted.
Lovely.
They're not as big as I'd like them, but on here. But does that help to see them when I'm clicking?
Yes.
On them?
Yeah. It does for me.
So yeah, thank you very much for everybody that has
submitted artwork.
Yes.
We will probably write you and ask you if you are happy with for us to share this on our social media platforms. That would be really nice. I'm sorry that this all is a bit rushed. I think that we were totally over ambitious about how much we can squeeze in an hour and a half. And although we timed ourselves and we recorded to make sure that we don't go over our time, that there are so many questions to be answered, and definitely the wow, it's very nice. As well with the Christmas decoration on. It's quite ironic in a way.
It's very Labena Himid, that one, isn't it?
That was mine. I listened to her talk and I tried to add imagine memorial sites or imagine memorials to our own walking map, actually.
Done a great job there.
Yeah, I really like her artwork, and your book in collaboration with her. I think collaboration with artists is really great. I wonder if we have any more questions. It's difficult to look at so many things, so I guess it would be great if Max could come back and read up a few questions, if that is possible.
Yes, hi. So there are a few about which I've tried to answer a couple in the chat, which are about our walk specifically. So one of the questions was whether a book was planned with more detail. And I said that I thought that book was about co-creation more broadly, but there would be a chapter on this project. Was I right in thinking
so yeah, so there's a book that Richard and I are editing, and we asked various people, like we made an open call for contributions, and we called up a number of people whom we have been working with in other contexts to submit chapters if they like. And so the idea is that students involved in the group would write up the making of the map and how they researched it, and how how we have improved it once we have improved it, and that would hopefully mature into a book chapter in the book, and then we could add also the one version, maybe a more advanced version of the map with some corrections and improvements. Any more questions maybe on that?
Yes. There was a question about whether the map can be shared online. I know that we have a digital version, so I assume that we'll end up putting that up on social medias and stuff.
Yes, it is on the co-creation website where it can be downloaded from, but we can, and we have been sending out various things. We also sent out versions, PDF versions that we try to attach to emails, and we saw that some mailboxes, like our university one, automatically class this as a spam. So you may actually have it in your spam folder. So you could look and see if it is not there. but yes, we are trying to put this out. So any more?
Yeah, there are there are a few. I'm aware that we're sort of a bit tight on time. What are our plans for distributing the maps and information? For example, incorporating this walk into existing ones of Bath, or circulation to schools?
Yeah, we have received some chats, some comments in the chat about possible collaborations about walking in Bath. So we would follow up on all the messages and all the suggestions that we received. So I think that we are now really a half an hour over. So I really thank you a lot for listening, for commenting. Thank you so much for the students who have presented and who have collaborated in the promotion of the event. We almost sold out the event with over 280 bookings, which really shows that there is an interest in Bath and around and also in the world for the work that that concerns, like, not just our work, but these memorial questions, definitely. So thank you. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Thank you for all the panelists for sharing your thoughts. We all hope to stay in touch with you and collaborate with you further in this project and maybe also other projects. Also, we shared our project email address and other availabilities. So please do not hesitate to write us if you have any suggestions for us. We have a survey circulating as well on which is a way for us to gather feedback on the walk to improve it. And we would, of course, we are looking for people who want to walk it and test it and reflect on it. We are still receiving, like, if you are willing to send us any artwork or any creative work, we are still happy to have more. And we will share this, and we are going to produce some awards for the best and luckiest winners for those who submitted artwork. And
there's a few more coming in. Yeah,
there's a few more coming in. That's excellent. So please carry on collaging and drawing, and we would be in touch if you send us anything. We can continue the conversation outside of this event. So thank you very much, everybody, panelists, group, and all the audiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Would you like me to share the very last slide with the addresses and things on, and leave it up for a minute?
Yes, okay, that's good. Good idea. Richard, your hand was up. Was that a bye-bye or was that a question?
Well, if the sound's still going, I just wanted to congratulate you, Christine, and Ben for holding this together. And all the speakers, all the young people, and just this number of people that have come online this evening. It just really shows that this is a moment that we need to kind of act with. So I'd really like to thank you again from me for given the opportunity to do that, but for all of the work and the stress that particularly you and Ben and the others that we saw very briefly at the front of it that have been putting it in. So good on you. Well done. Keep it up. Keep up good work.
Yeah, great work, Christine.
Thank you.
I don't know what happened there. Oh.
Okay, our references. Yes.
There we go.
Yes, so these are informations that we sent out to everybody. We have your email, everybody who signed up. So you also have our email. So please stay in touch if you have any suggestions or ideas or questions that we haven't answered yet.
I just want to give everyone a round of applause for doing it. Okay.